everybody is bracketed by their genetics, right? You've got this high and low body fat that you could be based on the genetics you've inherited, and you're kind of locked into that. And all you can do is go back and forth between your genetic brackets and be, either the worst body composition version of yourself possible or the best. And so like your only goal is to be a little bit better than you were before and aim as high as you can on your own personal genetic bracketing for body composition. And within that, it's pretty basic. Everybody just wants more lean mass and less fat mass. And like, honestly, if you look at, statistics, the more muscle mass you have, the longer you're going to live. And the lower your fat mass, the longer you're going to live. I mean, you really want to be like higher lean mass, lower fat mass. For most people, I think it's more useful to think of it as just this constant kind of main gaining or a recomp, or simultaneously gaining muscle and losing fat, a little bit of both at the same time. In terms of the diet, it's really, really basic. It really just comes down to protein versus non-protein energy, right? That's the really big picture way to look at it. Anytime you eat protein, you're maximally supporting your lean mass and your muscle. And every time you eat non-protein energy, carbs and fats, you're basically supporting your fat mass. And every bit of carbohydrate you eat displaces fat oxidation, because you have to burn that off first. And protein is there to build lean mass and to build muscle. And as long as you have the anabolic stimulus from resistance training and the protein available, you're going to have a muscle protein synthesis is going to be higher than breakdown. You're going to accrue lean mass, hopefully, again, within these very limited genetic brackets. Worldwide, humans in general, they're eating about 15% of calories from protein, 14, 15%. In America, over the past 60 or 70 years of the obesity epidemic, we dropped from maybe 15% down to about 12.5% just from protein dilution, from refined carbs and refined fats. And you just watch obesity kind of climb with this drop in protein, because now you have to eat more calories to get the same absolute amount of protein that you had before, because the protein percent is lower. And that's this whole protein leverage phenomenon. And we know really well how that works from, laboratory animals and studies with different dietary protein percents. And, the closer you get down to about 10% protein with, 45% each carbs and fats, the more you're just going to automatically overeat and get fatter, pretty much. That's what peak obesity would probably be: 45% carb, 45% fat, and 10% protein. And we're approaching that asymptotically. We're approaching this here in America, which is not good. So what you see is that anytime protein percent goes up, you tend to have basically weight loss. Like if you look at the database of successful weight loss, in America, like people who've lost, a statistically significant amount of their body weight and kept it off, they're getting protein up to like 19, 20%. And then if you can get up to, maybe 30% protein, you're going to pretty much reverse any prediabetes. You're going to see major reversals and improvements in any kind of type 2 diabetes, metabolic syndrome, insulin resistance. And then you've got your bodybuilder crowd. And these are the people who basically improve body composition for a living. It's their freaking job. So all these people just live in a 30+% protein range, maybe 30 to 40% protein. And then, of course, if you look at worldwide hunter-gatherer macronutrient estimates, they're about 33% protein by calories. And that's because if you just go out in the wild and kill something and eat it, it's pretty, if you just eat some wild game, it's pretty lean. The protein percent's really high. So you're really just kind of seeing this higher protein percentage as just automatically giving animals or humans lower body fat. For someone who's just lightly active or sedentary or whatever, 30% would be an awesome goal for anyone who's trying to reverse their type 2 diabetes, their metabolic syndrome, their insulin resistance. That would absolutely be my advice to anyone who's got metabolic issues, with the caveat that if you're doing tons of exercise, that could be lower. So I do a lot of very brief, very high intensity exercise. So my volumes are actually really tiny and I'm not burning a lot of extra calories. And so I do eat about a 30-something% protein diet pretty much all the time. My goal is, to be around 30% protein most of the time. And if I'm really cutting hard, it could be 40%. Gotcha. Okay. So for protein, I like about 1 gram per pound of ideal body weight, which, if you're lightly, moderately active, is going to be around the 30%.
And why the high intensity versus, say, resistance training or anything else?
Well, you're trying to get your VO2 max higher, right? So like if you look at longevity and health span and lifespan, the things that really stand out are number one, the higher your VO2 max, the longer you're going to live. You're going to have less cancer, less dementia, less neurodegenerative disease of any kind. You're going to have all these longevity and health span benefits from high VO2 max. And you're just not going to max out your VO2 capabilities without pushing that and trying to get an adaptation in that direction, which means doing something where you're redline. You're trying to achieve close to your maximum heart rate, so you can, get adaptations there. So I really like this high-end zone 5. Let's get your VO2 max higher type thing, because it seems to be so beneficial. And you're just only going to get that adaptation from really high-end exercise. It doesn't have to necessarily be for a long period of time. You can always have this seesaw trade-off between intensity and duration, but you can get that intensity higher and you're going to get those positive cardio adaptations that you really want.
Physical activity recommendations are 150 minutes of moderate to vigorous activity, 2 days a week of resistance training.
Well, they've made it optional. So it's like you can do 150 minutes of, lower intensity exercise. You can do, 150 of lower intensity or 75 minutes of high intensity, which is, 15 minutes, 5 days a week. Okay. And that's just as good as 150 minutes of moderate, which is highlighting this exact seesaw of intensity and duration. You go twice as hard with twice the nets, you can do half the time. And that's absolutely true and accurate if you're just looking at calories, right?
Yeah.
But if you're really trying to improve your VO2 max and get these positive adaptations, you might be better off making sure you're doing some of that high-end stuff. And it's just like lifting weights, where you probably want to play the entire rep range and do some high intensity, shorter duration, and some lower intensity, higher duration. But you do want to make sure you have some of that all-out type stuff in there, I think, to get the adaptations you're looking for. I think in terms of frequency, it really just depends on what your overall weekly volume is. You could do a little bit every day, or you could do a whole bunch 1 day a week, and they're both kind of equivalent. So the good news about that is it gives you a lot of freedom to just do whatever fits your schedule. The bad news about that is some people are so focused on just being perfect and optimal that they're just not even going to do anything until they feel like their plan is perfect. Right. And that's BS. It's never going to happen. It's so much more important that you just get out there and do something. So for me, the protein is absolutely critical. It's primary. You have to nail that. The carbs, you do want to dial that with your need for carbohydrate. And then fat is kind of what's left over. Fat is very, very passive. It's not really doing anything great for anyone. The satiety from it is so delayed that it's not, it's just not that helpful in the short term. Right. No one's getting a performance boost from it in the short term. Eating more fat if you're doing more cardio at a lower, like if you're doing more zone 2 cardio or something, lots of, if your job gives you a step count of 30,000 steps because you're a UPS delivery driver and you're doing a lot of this lower intensity stuff where you're just burning tons of fat, you need more calories, that's going to, you know, eating more fat is where that's going to come from. Calories are basically a kind of a joke, kind of worthless. It's just not that helpful, because even if you did calculate how many calories you're burning or how many you need or where you should be, it's going to change every single day. You know, people eat way more calories one day and then they just automatically way less calories the next day. And your body sort of auto regulates this. And as long as your exercise level is high enough, you'll do a really good job of pulling calories, basically matching your intake to your expenditure. But where we get into trouble is when people are super sedentary. So these studies show that if you're really sedentary, you just eat way more calories than your body needs. For some reason, it seems to break hunger and satiety signaling. Most of your weight loss resistant people have spent 99% of their effort on the diet side. They're constantly trying to eat less calories, shave down those calories. What, you know, how can I eat one less calorie? And they're just cranking so hard on the diet lever. They've got this vast amount of exercise lever that they just never tap into. And so I would tell that person, okay, the second you wake up in the morning, you have to go walk an hour on the treadmill. That's it. And when you start out, you could walk 1 mile an hour, totally flat. And then what you do is you just progressively overload that. Now you go faster, and now you go a little steeper, and you know you want to eventually get to the point where you're, you know, burning 800 calories doing this. And then what ends up happening is your calorie burn is so much higher that you just automatically start matching your intake to your expenditure, and you just automatically you'll probably end up eating the exact same number of calories, but since you burn more and you're matching better, you're going to lose weight. You know what I'm saying? So it turns out that everybody is burning and eating the exact same amount of calories everywhere, everyone, period. Like all this Herman Ponzer stuff, what he found out is freaking everybody's eating and burning the exact same number of calories, right? You got this Hadza male who's eating and burning like 2,700 calories a day. And then you've got a US male who's eating and burning maybe 2,900 calories a day. I mean, there's almost no difference between them, right? And if they try to eat less or burn less, it doesn't work. Your body just wants to eat and burn the same amount of calories. The difference between them is that the US male on average is like 198 pounds.
Okay.
And the Hadza is like 139 pounds or something.
Okay.
You know, less than half the body fat percentage. But the US male is doing 4,000 step count a day, and the Hadza is doing 20,000 step count a day. The US is doing 4 or 5 minutes of exercise a day. The Hadza is doing 2.5 hours of exercise a day, mostly walking, you know. So it turns out basically you're going to burn the same amount of energy and eat the same amount of energy no matter what, but you can burn it by either just having a bigger body and way more fat mass and just sitting on the couch all day, or being super skinny and walking 20,000 steps a day. You just got to get to the point where you make this trade-off of physical activity as being the way you're burning all the calories you're just going to eat, instead of sitting there completely motionless and being huge. It's really hard to start that exercise part when you already weigh so much and you're already burning so many calories just having a larger body, right? So these people who are super overweight are burning a lot of calories, and then if they try to exercise, the cost of that activity is huge. So it's a really, really hard, almost impossible. And that's why so many people have to start on the diet side first, right? So you do actually work on your diet, lose a little bit of weight, and then you do have more energy availability to start doing more exercise. So we see this really smooth shift where as you work on the diet and lose weight, and get a little bit lighter, you can actually start doing more exercise. And then what you have to do is just keep smoothly ramping up the exercise as you get a smaller body. And then long term, you have to keep exercising at a really high level forever, or you're just going to regain, right? So you're going to, if you stop exercising, you'll just, your body wants to eat and burn the same amount. So you're going to eat the same amount, and then you're going to, if you're not burning it with exercise, you're just going to get a larger body again. For me, there's 3 types of exercise that absolutely everyone has to be doing, and they are completely separate in my mind. The way I think about it, they're completely separate. You have resistance exercise over here, which is critical as hell. And this is the only way you're going to build muscle and maximize muscle mass. And along with VO2 max, the other 2 things that are most associated with longevity and health span is strength and then muscle mass, right? So you want to be strong, you want to have a lot of muscle. You will only get that with resistance exercise. You'll only get more muscle with resistance exercise, and you only get more strength with really heavy, really hard resistance exercise. You know, I'm talking 70% of your 1 rep max or higher, you know, ideally, if you're trying to get those strength adaptations. So everyone needs to be doing resistance exercise in a very targeted, very specific way, where you're hitting absolute failure in a movement pattern, push-pull legs, and ideally doing heavy enough that you're getting all the strength adaptations that you want out of that. So doing at least some of your work in a 70–80% of your 1 rep max, you know, I'm talking 10 reps, hitting failure in 10 reps or lower. And you want to do some of that at least twice a week. 3 times a week is probably better. And it really comes down to number of sets per week. So you could do a little bit every day, you could do a whole bunch once a week. But again, optimal is probably somewhere in between, where you're doing 2 to 4 times a week, you know, moderate volume instead of like all of it on one day or a little bit on every day. And but that's resistance training, right? You want to be very specific, very targeted, hit absolute failure in all of your muscles, push pull legs, full body, high intensity of effort, ideally a fairly high load as well. You know, don't hurt yourself, don't like PR on, you know, one, you know, don't do singles on every lift, but you know, you want to do something fairly heavy. Then there's like this VO2 high intensity cardio I was talking about, where you're trying to redline your heart rate and you're trying to do some zone 5, and you're trying to really tax your cardiorespiratory system. So you get these positive adaptations, you get a bigger cardiac stroke output, and you get all this sort of thing. And then there's this kind of other cardio, general movement bucket, where, you know, you want to hit 10,000 steps a day. You want to just be moderately active. You want to just burn a certain amount of calories in general physical movement. That could be your job or just activities of daily living. Or if you are a super sedentary job, you might have to do this hour on the treadmill I'm talking about. The overlaps between these 3 different forms of exercise, but you pretty much want to think about it as like high-end cardio, maximum effort, resistance training, and then step count, general movement, burning a certain amount of calories with physical activity in general. And so for me, it's like these 3 different things that everyone absolutely has to be doing some way or another.